They say all is fair in love and war, but all is not fair. Why do the good die young? Why does evil prosper?
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
In this series, love and war find their beginning. Only by knowing their past do we get clues as to how the story ends.
The Bible does give President Trump moral authority to use whatever force necessary.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. How quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
What I'm about to tell you is perhaps the most divisive subject in world history. It's the event we track time with. It's the event that sparked a global revolution and forever changed the power structures of the earth. It all started in the desert of Palestine nearly 2,000 years ago. The sun was bright, the sky was blue, and the desert nomad had been warning about something ominous, yet revolutionary, just on the edge of the desert. At this time, Israel was the cultural crossroads for the entire world, so news traveled extremely fast. Many believed Israel was soon to be rid of the Roman yoke and were to again regain the global dominance they once had. All they needed was the power that was once theirs. That mystical, supernatural force that annihilated armies in a night. That force that dwelt in the golden box they carried into war, or at least so they thought. The Messiah was the last piece of the puzzle to global dominance. See, the nation of Israel was looking for a king to conquer the nations, someone to command the armies with invincibility, but instead, a poor Galilean child from Nazareth was rumored to be the chosen one, but he did not look the part. And as soon as the desert prophet boldly claimed Yeshua was the one they had hoped for, Lucifer began to fear for the safety of his kingdom. Lucifer had remembered a prophecy given by Michael way back in the garden that one day a child would be born who would crush the head of the serpent. And Lucifer fully understood who was represented by the serpent, he himself. So as Yeshua stepped out of the Jordan River, he was not headed to the city of David to be crowned king by the crowds like they had hoped, but instead he headed in the other direction to the desert by himself. Israel expected this moment for thousands of years that a king would come to make war. But this was because of a misunderstanding of the prophecies. Selfishness, empire building, and ambition led them to misunderstand the writings of the seers and oracles of old that had foretold of the mystery being revealed like a lamb, humble, innocent, and that would go to the slaughter. And finally, the time had come. A date with destiny. If mankind was to be saved from destruction, one of mankind would have to pass the test given way back in the garden. But not in the mind and body of a man like Adam or a woman like Eve, a giant, both of them with no temptations, no sins, no inherited tendencies. This time, it would be after 4,000 years of a degenerated race, after thousands of years of selfishness, which had nearly destroyed man. Isa al-Masih, the Messiah, the Prince, Yeshua, Jesus, whatever name you choose to call him, he would endure the threefold test under the most dire circumstances. This was the same test given in the garden. And he would overcome where man had fallen. He would take the crown from Lucifer and forever secure it upon man. So as the story is told, 30 years earlier, Michael, the prince of Janah, had stepped down and had become one with mankind, the son of Mary. And he grew up as a man, and now he would enter upon the very reason for his existence, this mysterious purpose, to save man and to reveal the mystery to all realms and begin to put an end to all the lies that were said about him and of Jah and of Janah. So for thousands of years, mothers and fathers had relayed the story to their children that one day the prince would come and he would save them from the destruction of selfishness before it was too late. You know, they say when the Spanish fleet landed on the shores of the New World, Cortez turned to them and said, "Burn the ships." And, you know, that moment 30 years prior in Bethlehem was somewhat of the same. There was no going back. Everything depended on Yeshua. Everything in the universe was at risk. When Jerusalem was destroyed the very first time by the Babylonian Empire, one of those Hebrew slaves in Babylon was visited by a guardian and given visions and dreams of the future. And he foretold of this event when the prince would come. But you should know that the condition of the world at that time, it was different. At this time when Yeshua finally comes on the scene, the world was under one government. Most people spoke one common language. Everyone was enamored with entertainment, pleasure, sports, and the people were tired of religion and the dryness of it all. They wanted something fresh, something that would give them hope, something that was genuine. Perhaps you're asking the same questions today. Give me the genuine. Israel was pretty much universally deceived and deluded by the demon of ambition. Roman rule was all they could talk about. It's all they could think about. When this Galilean was born, rumors began to circulate of a coming deliverer who would establish a kingdom solely for the chosen race and from which would exclude every other people on the earth. It was believed that the Messiah would break the heathen yoke to lift up his people and designate princes among them. And all nations would be summoned to appear before the one sent by Jah and would be called upon to surrender themselves or be consumed. So as you can see, this is not the same picture of a being who came to save his creation by voluntarily sacrificing himself for them. It was something entirely different. And that's where misperceptions and misconceptions came in. Lucifer watched as the prince came up out of that desert river, the Jordan, and he watched him walk into the desert wilderness, and he followed him. At first, Lucifer wasn't clear on what was going on. You know, he'd heard this voice from the sky at the baptism. This was confirmation that definitely Yeshua was the one he was looking for. But as he followed this weak-looking Palestinian into the desert, he couldn't understand why Michael would have left the city of Janah and become one with this weak, degraded species of man. It filled Lucifer with fear and anxiety that his days were numbered and that his power would soon be broken. He knew what the seers had foretold, and he knew that everything was dependent on this moment, that the fullness of time had come. You know, the book Hebrews tells us, for this reason he had to be made like mankind, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to Jah, and that he might make atonement. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Many think Michael, now Yeshua, was like some superhero acting a part, which really totally downplays what really happened 2,000 years ago. Michael had laid down all of his powers and had become a weak human with the ability to access power from Jannah just like any other human has and has ever had. So he really became one of us. And here were the three tests that man must pass and that Yeshua would pass through: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. All three where man had fallen in the very beginning. But once into this desert, everything started to change. Even the facial expressions of Yeshua began to change. It was like this burden was being laid upon him, and for 40 days, he doesn't eat or drink. He just wanders in this desert. He looked like he was dying, and then finally, the time came. Lucifer hadn't been seen for many days, but then out of the blue sky, he appeared like a flash of lightning, and he was beautiful, young, vibrant, full of wisdom. Words don't do Lucifer justice. He began to walk up to the prince, appearing as a guardian from the city of Jannah. And he stated that he had been sent as a kind gesture to sympathize with Yeshua. Lucifer says, Jah doesn't require such excruciating self-denial and suffering. I have come from the city of Jannah to tell you that you were only asked to prove your willingness to endure, and you've passed the test. Congratulations are in order. You don't need to continue to suffer painful hunger or even risk death from starvation. And then he kind of offers himself to it. Let me help you. I'd like to think this dude at this moment, Lucifer, was one smooth mamma jamma. But it gets better. Lucifer then says, I'm trying to be generous here. I mean, considering the circumstances. I know that for many years, your sweet mother misled you, thinking you were someone special. But you know, after the adultery, your stepdad Joseph tried to cover it up and had your mother believe this fanciful fantasy. I mean, look at you, look all around. Did they not tell you? Well, allow me. One of the most exalted guardians of Jannah has been exiled to the earth. And Yeshua, you should know that you are no prince of Jannah, but instead you're a traitor. You are the fallen Lucifer who has been banished. Look at our appearances. The evidence is clear. This was a masterclass in psychological warfare. And so Lucifer goes on with this craftiness and this guile, and he goes on to say, you know, it was not in the character of Jah to permit anyone to endure such extreme suffering like this, well, unless, of course, in the event that Yeshua was actually the archenemy of Jannah. Then, perhaps, you know, the conditions could be right. You see, Lucifer was hoping to plant and insinuate just enough doubt to get the prince to assert himself. Because if Yeshua used any of his powers that he had access to, then he could not honestly stand in the place of you and I. And so Lucifer, he goes on to state that Yeshua was clearly no representative of Jannah and much less a commander in the royal courts. Yeshua's appearance indicated that clearly he was forsaken by his own race and by those in the city of Jannah. But if he wanted to prove himself, well, then just a simple test could be demonstrated. By taking the stone at his feet, turn it into some bread, nothing fancy, just bread. And if he could do this, then Lucifer would give him the benefit of the doubt. Work some magic for your own benefit. And so you can imagine this moment. How does Yeshua respond to all of this? Well, he acts like he hadn't heard a word of it. He came to save the race and not himself. And see, that was the accusation in the Capitol eons before, that Yeshua, Michael, was just out to save himself. Of everything in the garden, remember, the test was appetite. Man could eat everything except the fruit of one little tree. So Adam wasn't even hungry when he faced his first test. The prince hasn't eaten food for 40 days in the hot desert sun, and he responds with the words, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Jah." This was the first test. But there were two more tests. Lucifer wanted to be sure and make sure that Yeshua knew of Lucifer's superior strength. So Lucifer carries him up into Jerusalem onto the top of this pinnacle, and he sets Yeshua there and says, "If truly you are who you say you are, throw yourself down from here." See, the first temptation with bread was about making Yeshua doubt that Jah cared for him. This temptation was to lead Yeshua into presumption, and so hoping that he could trick him up, Lucifer thought by misquoting some scripture, it would confuse Yeshua. But Yeshua knew exactly what was going on and said, "It is written, don't tempt Jah." And so Lucifer was in essence trying to get Yeshua to commit suicide and end this war once and for all. Because Yeshua had become one of us. Think about that. But few realize that Lucifer was trying to practice hypnotism and telepathy on Yeshua in this very moment, but it wasn't working overtly and covertly. But remember, in both of these temptations, these first two, it was this young, commanding, beautiful being presenting himself as this ambassador of Jannah, contrasting himself with this emaciated Palestinian at the door of death. But then everything changes. After Lucifer realized this was not working, he changes his tactics, and now he removes his disguise. He then takes Yeshua up on this mountain that few know the location of, which apparently has a view of the whole earth. And Lucifer then describes how he has become the prince of all the earth, all the kingdoms. And Lucifer reveals the glory of all these kingdoms off in the distance. Yeshua can only see the glory of the whole earth. And this was perhaps the most powerful of all the temptations, because there is nothing Yeshua looks forward to more than when the earth is teeming with a new civilization and buzzing with activity untainted by selfishness. So in this moment, that's all he sees. And Lucifer showed Yeshua the glory of these kingdoms and said that he was willing to hand over the dominion of each of them to Yeshua as a gift, without a fight, no suffering, no sorrow, no death. The scepter held by Lucifer over all the earth would be given to the prince in exchange for one small gesture. Bow down, worship Lucifer, and honor him as superior, the benevolent benefactor of the human race. And for a moment, Yeshua looked out, but he knew all would be lost. And he turned away and he looked straight into the piercing eyes of Lucifer and said, "Get away from me. It is written, worship Jah and serve him only." And then Yeshua falls like dead on the ground. Lucifer leaves. A unit of guardians is sent to encourage Yeshua, prepare him some food, eat with him, celebrate this victory with him. And you would think that in this very moment, the war would have been over. But not quite yet. And we learned the reason for that was because that was only one victory of a number of victories that needed to be won. The next one was back in Jerusalem. The Hebrews had long expected a conquering commander. And Yeshua was just not who they expected. He spends his time with the poor, the sick, the outcasts. He doesn't play to the politicians or religious leaders. And he has this group of young hooligans that are following him. And after 3.5 years, Yeshua finally walks into the Garden of Gethsemane, unsure if he will survive the night from the turmoil and burden he is carrying. And he meets Lucifer there too, because Lucifer wasn't going to miss this. This was one last chance. The war that had begun long before with Lucifer accusing Yeshua, then called Michael, of being a selfish person and holding things back from the citizens of Jannah, and well, of the whole universe as well. Those accusations. Now it stands here in a garden. Now the contest would be decided. Lucifer had been preparing for this moment. Everything was at stake, in the here and in the now, and if anyone failed, all was lost. Yeshua had proved in this life and in that desert that mankind could live an unselfish existence. And Yeshua had won the crown as Prince of the Earth. But still mankind was lost and no hope of immortality without an intervention. And Yeshua would prove that Jah and he were not selfish as they had been accused. So the destiny of mankind and all created beings, the very existence of Jannah, all was weighing in the balance on this night. And knowing all that, what do you think Lucifer would do to make one last attempt at a victory? He can't kill Yeshua, so he has to lead him outside the protection of Jah and the guardians. And to do that, Lucifer begins whispering that if Yeshua lays down his life for mankind, the separation from Jah and Jannah would be eternal. And Lucifer whispers, what would be gained from this sacrifice anyway? Look at how ungrateful man is and was. All these thoughts are being implanted telepathically so that Yeshua needs to filter each and every one to determine, are these my own thoughts? Are these thoughts from the enemy? And Lucifer is casting these doubts by saying, the people who claim to be above all others in temporal and spiritual advantages, they've rejected you. They are seeking to destroy you, the foundation, the center, and seal of the promises made to them as a peculiar people. Everyone's going to forsake you. You can imagine Yeshua's entire being is shuddering. This conflict is terrible. The guilt of a world lying in the darkness of selfishness and superstition. At this moment, all of the unfallen worlds were watching. All of the citizens of Jannah are watching. Everyone. What will happen next? Yeshua's body was dying. His heart would not survive the stress of this moment. And it began to literally come apart. He began to sweat drops of blood. He was praying for a way of escape. And in this moment, he believes sincerely that he will be forever cut off from his family, from Jah, because sin and selfishness are so destructive. And so he has a choice to make. Finally, he sees no other way, and finally and fully commits to complete the mission, no matter what. Fully believing he's not going to make it through the tomb or the grave, but others would. And this made it worth it to him. This is the essence of love. He didn't have to do this, but he chose to lay down his life. It's interesting, all pagan religions and their deities require sacrifice from man, but this story is completely different. The prophecy of this night described how he would go as a lamb willingly to the slaughter. And all must see the extent to which man and fallen angels would go to destroy the life giver. So there were crowds inspired by these demons mocking him. Nothing could stop his march to free the captives. And under that Palestinian sun, the last temptation was hurled at him. A whisper in the ears of the crowd from the legions, and the shout that cries out, "Save yourself. Others you saved, save yourself." But this war, this was about selfishness or selflessness. And Yeshua, Jesus, chose love. Love for people that didn't understand it. It makes you ask why he would go through with this for people like them, like you, and like me. It's because the foundation of his government is love, a complete 100% unselfishness. Everyone watching this moment, as it finally ends and he shouts, "It is finished," they scream out in victory. We're told many of the guardians are still wondering in these last few scenes if perhaps there hadn't been just maybe a big misunderstanding. But now they finally realize Lucifer has been unmasked, and he has clothed himself in such this beautiful disguise. Many just didn't comprehend what his administration and his campaign had been all about. And this day, love and selfishness stood face to face and love won. And you could hear the celebration throughout all the worlds that the mission had been accomplished. The administration of Jannah were clearly innocent, and Lucifer and his followers were the guilty party with false accusations. There were still some unanswered questions. Some of the guardians still wondered. We're told for the sake of man, the contest was allowed to continue. And Yeshua promises he would return one day in the future, but the mystery had a few more secrets to it.